Sherry, if I may. When an entrepreneur looks at you and says, I'm scaling, could mean many things, but what do you mean when we talk about scaling up? Lots of ways to measure that. What do you mean?
Well, technically, if you use an academic definition, which is the OECD, which is what we used in the report, it's growing like a tank for at least 3 years. In the olden days, people used to talk about SMEs, small and medium-sized companies, which is one snapshot in time. But actually, you're only growing or shrinking, so it really matters if you're growing or shrinking. And it gets harder if you keep on growing year after year after year. So
are we talking about the money ringing through the tills, or the profit, or the headcount?
It's both, because the industries are different. So for life sciences, it's headcount. Yeah. And for tech industries, it's often the turnover. Okay. And it's turnover because we try to get a sense of the jobs and the growth that's going into the GDP through the economy, the transactions that are taking place between large companies and small companies. Yeah. And turnover is a good measure because it means that a customer is parting with money, and that means that therefore value is being created by something on a fundamental basis. So technically 20% per annum, you start at least 10 employees, but you can be 200 employees and 200 million in turnover and still grow at 20% for 2 years, and you're still a scale-up.
Yeah, I understand. So in terms of the report that you wrote, you've got a shopping list, a wish list of what we need in this country to support more scale-ups. If you were to summarize that a little bit for us, what comes to the top of that list? I'm going to go in the reverse order that people usually expect. People usually expect to start with finance, but it doesn't start with finance. It should end with finance. Talent's the most important thing. If we can't hire people to fulfill our massive customer orders, we can't fulfill the customer orders, so that's really, really important. Leadership development, if you're growing like a tank year in and year out, if you're hiring 15 new people every week, that's tough. Yep. And you, as yourself, grow and change as a leader, and having people around who can mentor and who are peers to help you along that road is very important. So that's important. Leadership development. Access to big companies. The third biggest headache is actually selling to large corporates and to the government, strangely enough. So for that, it's how exactly, what are their procurement processes, and how do you navigate them? And that's a pretty easy problem to solve once you know that that's going to be if that's the biggest problem, you can fix that. And then there's finance. But if you don't address the leadership and the talent and how they learn how to sell to big customers, then you might as well not talk about finance, because you won't be able to have a sustainable company. Yes. And scale-ups are about removing barriers. Lots of people, you need support. It's not support. They actually need barriers that are in their way to be removed. And so Nick and Gary, you're listening to Sherry's shopping list there. Which one of those three particularly resonates, or maybe we've missed one? And I'd love a specific example of where you struggle to scale, I suppose, because you are growing so quickly.
So talent, people has probably been the one that's occupied most of my time. Not just because if you're hiring lots of people, and that's a time-consuming thing, but the business goes through a number of milestones and growth points where what works yesterday just doesn't work anymore. And the people that you had when you had 10 people are different to the people you need when you have a couple of hundred. And so I think people really resonates with me, spending a lot of time on hiring and building a great team. And again, when you're building a business that's growing, you often can't afford to give people time to build into the role. You need to hire people that can hit the ground running, and and they're hard to find. Okay. So people would be a huge
briefly,
thing.
Nick, what would you add?
I think trying to scale without exploding costs, without exploding headcount. So it is difficult to hire quickly, but trying to scale financially without hiring another 15 people a week is actually more difficult still. And I'm a tech guy, I come from a tech. How many people here are from tech, by the way? I was just thinking about that. How many people admit to being from tech? Maybe that's a slightly different way of putting it. My job is to make sure that our business can scale without having to just keep hiring, because we need to maintain fleet of foot. That's really, it's quite easy to grow when you're a small business, but when you start getting bigger, you need to maintain. We scale through automation, really. I mean, that's what was talked about in the previous presentation. Automation is key to us. We talked about, they talked about 25 days to onboard a new customer in financial services. We onboard them same day. And so that's how we scale. We scale by making our processes more and more efficient. We still have to fill out the 25-page forms. We still work with financial services institutions that require AML, underwriting checks. We have to go through the same rigmarole, but we manage to automate as much of it making use of the Joodle API as part of that, and that's the way we scale without having to
Okay. And I wonder if we are really living in uncertain times, because what, is this more uncertain than what, 2001, 2008? Aren't times always uncertain? And frankly, let's just get on with it. It's pretty much the same as it's always been, isn't it?
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, the best entrepreneurs that we see are just ploughing on. And I think there's a well-known phrase that many of the best companies are built in a downturn because you get access to the talent and you get access to opportunities that you wouldn't in a normal market. So and I think that the talent bit is something that resonates with some of the guys. We'll hold something like the Founders Forum, where you bring all of these CEOs that are kind of built billion-dollar companies and growing at crazy rates. And they call it a self-help group where they can finally let their guard down because they say everyone expects us to know exactly what we're doing. But we've never been through this hyper growth before. We're going through 1,000% every few months. And then they say the biggest thing they had to realize when they were scaling was that you can only hire people and look forward 3 to 6 months. And then it will be completely different. And I think that's once you start getting into that pattern recognition, then you start scaling.
And what about some of the world's most successful organisations? I'm thinking of Sony looking maybe 100 years in advance. Let's talk about 5 or 10. Is that for the birds? Or do we just look at the road ahead?
In terms of their ability to scale?
Yeah, shouldn't your founders be really gazing out there onto the horizon? Or are you saying, guys, stick to the knitting?
No, I think when we look at tech as a whole, the cycles are becoming so compressed and everything. I mean, everyone's read about the Snapchat IPO and is that a messaging business? Is it a camera business? Is it hardware? No one really knows where that's going to be in 3 years. And all of the best companies are thinking about that. They're saying we're this at the moment, but in 3 years' time, we're going to be absolutely something different. And you've got to be doing M&A. You can see all of the big guys are doing 20 acquisitions a year to try and keep it in touch with the next cycle.
And if you had to pick one thing other than small children that keeps your founders awake at night, what tends to come up more than anything else?
I think it is hiring. It's because, and the problem just keeps moving. So you hit that $1 billion valuation, you're a Spotify, you hit a $10 billion valuation. You're now looking for talent that's scaled from 10 to 100, and that isn't available in Europe. So you have to go out to the US to bring that talent.
Okay, so you have to go out to the US to find the people.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, that's a very interesting talking point we might come back to. I just wonder, others, how do you respond to that uncertainty word? Look out and see uncertain times, Gary?
So I think, so first off, if you're running a business or starting a business, then you must be comfortable with some degree of uncertainty. Otherwise, you just take a salary and have a normal job. And so I think there's something in the DNA of running a business or being an entrepreneur or founder that makes you comfortable with that. When I think about our business, which is probably potentially one of the most boring categories of software ever, I mean, accounting software, is way down the spectrum from rocket guidance to where we are. And one of the most important things that we kind of look at the moment, everybody's saying, well, what about Brexit? What about uncertainty? And that's actually pretty cool because be in a category that has the resilience to do well when you're in a boom market and everything's going well and everybody's spending lots of money and we would prosper there. But I think this whole concept of the role that data has to play and knowing your numbers and knowing where you are and bringing certainty to your business, to your market, to your customers is actually even more important in uncertain times. So I think there's a resilience either way.
And I'd love to come on to how you're each using data in that way. But I just want to come quickly back on this point, Sherry. If people say, and let's not forget, we're still pre-Brexit, aren't we? But if your founders that you've invested in say, Sherry, we are holding off on some crucial decisions until things settle down a little. Are you saying, are you finding that under foolish? Or that's exactly the sort of entrepreneurial spirit we need? Good luck and get on with it.
It kind of depends on whether or not it's one of my big companies or one of my little companies.
Because the little ones are more or less resilient?
If it's a little company, there's a huge amount of opportunity and you should run really fast so you can run circles around the big ones. So that spells opportunity, I think, for those of us who are entrepreneurial. If you've got a solid business case and your dashboards and your data is telling you that you've got the customer traction and it's wiring, that means that if you can get the customers, if your true north is the customers and you're using technology and data in a way that's transforming their lives from 2 weeks or 25 days down to 90 seconds, that's very cool.
Yeah.
Run really fast around the slow guys and eat their lunch. So I think that's kind of fun. I think Brexit for the entrepreneurs in us spells a huge amount of opportunity because the world is moving quite quickly. And one of the things that I love about being an entrepreneur is when the world is reconfiguring, there are white spaces and gaps opening up for us to solve the problems of customers who currently are in anguish. And that's a good thing.
I'm going to change the subject a little bit, but it riffs off this, which is to say, Nick, let's go into the sort of cockpit of your sort of Millennium Falcon I'm imagining here, your dashboards. What are you tracking in terms of data information that helps you scale up? And I'm just looking for very specific examples, particularly if it's only become recently possible. And I'm going to ask you about that as well, Gary.
You think I'm into Star Wars coming in IT?
I sort of
That's
am
pretty
imagining
cruel.
that Han Solo effect.
So,
yeah.
So I was chatting to Gary earlier about this. The prevalence of data it's very different to 5 years ago. So we use data for all the three things that was mentioned in the previous presentation. But in terms of sort of instructing our business, we take data, all the data we use, pretty much from everything, from our phone system, from our AdWords, from Google Analytics, pretty much everything centralized. Most people do this. And it's because it's quite easy now. The tooling now is really quite straightforward. We actually push the tooling into our business as well. So it's not necessarily an IT function to report and provide dashboards. It's actually sort of semi-IT literate business people that can do it, and they tend to devise the dashboards that actually work for them.
Yep.
So one of the problems that you can get is analysis paralysis. So I've been in businesses, I've actually caused some of the problems in the past, if I'm honest, where I've provided far too much data. I said, look at all this data, and then you find no one's selling anything,
So-
and going down because everyone's just looking at the data. So it's about getting the right level of data to the right people at the right time. It needs to be real time sometimes. Don't overdo it.
Okay, but let's zoom in on that. So let's talk about somebody who's in marketing, customer acquisition, who's newly empowered by the philosophy you've just talked about. What can they do at the moment that
They can see
really
click-through rates on our ads at the same time. They can see conversion rate. We manage to track conversion even via phone calls into our... We're a very complex sales process, so you have to phone in.
Yeah.
We've managed to track that data all the way through to a conversion, so they can track that real time. Into service, we can see the number of calls that an agent has taken. We can see if feedback coming in for negative feedback can be reacted to immediately by putting this on dashboards and on wallboards.
Yep, yep.
It's about getting the right data for the right team and giving it...
Gary, does Pepsi bother considering what Coca-Cola is up to? Should it?
And so I think it's appropriate to do that sometimes. I think you can develop a kind of obsessive competitor disorder where you're constantly, what is everybody else doing? And you're then, before long, you're then driving your business as a response to what other people are doing. And you lose sight of your customer and what you stand for. And so I think it's a healthy discipline occasionally to just check in and see what's available. And there isn't a massive amount of information available. I love kind of playing around on Doodle occasionally and just trying to kind of reverse code what everybody else is doing. It's kind of interesting.
What's an example of a nugget that you as a co-founder could get hold of that could give you a competitive advantage? Would you reveal it here? Discuss, no. But just help us a little bit, get our heads into it.
So I think it's good. So we drive our business on a very specialised set of metrics. It's all driven around growth and customer acquisition and the efficiency of customer acquisition. And so the conventional things like profit and loss reporting and balance sheets, we do them, but they're kind of like historical documents, and it's not how we drive the business. And so we're very invested in understanding the efficiency of our growth, the efficiency of our specific resources, the people, the campaigns, the initiatives, and it's useful to benchmark how we think we're doing on some of those measurements.
Manish, when the founders you invest in come back and say, look, I'm just hearing this word everywhere, data's everywhere, we have to be harnessing it in smarter ways so that we can scale up. What do you say, and what are the best examples of doing that you've seen? Because it can be quite mind-blowing.
It can be, and I think that analysis paralysis is quite common when you first start out. So I guess we're in a little bit of a fortunate position because we see what all of the large tech companies are trying to acquire, and they're all trying to acquire data science teams at the moment. And then the startups are all coming out with very smart solutions, which combines data analysis of the external world and then marrying that with your data warehouse internally. And if you could start mixing the two, and examples of this I think are on product cycles. So thinking about fashion, which clothes to make, if you can combine with what you've seen selling across your particular stores, you can then buy data now of people where people have hovered over certain things, the click-through rates on various other sites, and you start aggregating this whole view of where they've shopped, what they've looked at over 10 or 15 different competitors. It can influence your purchasing decision and what's going to be fashionable this year, the bomber jacket or whatever is the latest trend. And I think when you can start really setting up your data warehouse, but overlaying some intelligence of the external market, that's where you start seeing things happen.
I'd like to just focus us all, sort of zoom out and look back at Britain. You've all worked and have customers all over the world. 2 quick observations, something perhaps that this isn't gloating, but is remarkable in a positive sense, but also we must get better at something. What was the sort of state of the nation, a snapshot? I might start with you, Sherry, because I know you are often asked for your advice on this, and Manish, you've advised the Treasury on these sorts of things.
So one of the things that I think we are remarkable at is the amount of data that there is. And if I look at some of the other countries in which I operate, I am often amazed at the data that we have.
How opaque it is,
Well, no, there is more data here than there is elsewhere. Right. So our ability to do a data play that involves data science by connecting different sources from a lot of different places is pretty extraordinary here. And Doodle is a good example of that. And an example of what? So
one could do better. An area.
Oh no, we could totally do better. So if I think about, we said in particular to scale-ups that if the government would release a little bit more data that was fresher, as it were, on particularly businesses, so that you could spot the fast-growing ones 12 to 18 months faster, we felt that would put 255 billion on the bottom line in the next 7 years.
And we might talk about the data sets we'd love to get our hands on. I'm going to ask the 3 gents to be extremely pithy, just with your remarkable and could do better. Gary.
I think what Sherry says about, I think we could do a much better job of connecting the government and supporting the government. There's lots of stuff happening in HMRC right now that have profound impacts for running a business, and it just feels like there could be more engagement there. Stuff that I think that we're really good at. I mean, we're just classically really stoic, and whatever the challenge comes down the line, we're pretty level-headed, conservative, cool-headed, level-headed all the time, and I think that's a good thing.
And you see that in comparison to other European
absolutely,
nations?
Absolutely.
Okay, food for thought. Thank you, Manish.
So the amazing thing, I think, is we've created 18 companies that are worth more than $1 billion in technology since 2000, and that's way more than any other European country. The bit that we need to improve on is spinning out some amazing technology that sits within universities and corporates in a commercial way. That's where the US is miles ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. No, very interesting. Okay, Nick.
I like the way you get multicultural and diversity for free, especially in London. London is like a bit of a special case, but it works. I've worked in the States, I've worked in France, and it doesn't happen there. Yeah. It's like a mecca to all the best people, and they all want to flood to London and to the larger UK, and that really helps out. Yeah. In terms of together, we should just train everyone to be a software developer. I know it's happening, but it's the way. I know, good work. But
the government's just released its digital strategy. You can read all about it online. Sadly, we haven't got time to discuss it now because it is high time for a coffee break. Has that been useful, everybody?